Everything you were taught about African history before European contact is wrong. Not incomplete, wrong. A king stands over a freshly struck coin, gold, his face on one side, a cross on the other. The year is 330 CE. His treasury has been minting money for 60 years already, in 3 metals, in 2 languages, trading directly with Rome and Persia as an equal. Nobody taught you that. They taught you Africa was bartering, that civilization arrived on ships from Europe, that the continent was waiting to be discovered. But the coins don't lie. They never did. They just sat in museum drawers while historians wrote a different story, one that made conquest easier to justify. This empire controlled the only sea route between Europe and India. When a rival kingdom tried to cut them out of that trade, they didn't negotiate. They invaded an entire continent. Stay with me, because by the end, you will know the name of the African empire that forced Rome to pay attention, the port city that made it all possible, and exactly how colonial historians buried one of the ancient world's most sophisticated economies in plain sight.
The year is 270 CE. In the northern highlands of what is now Ethiopia, a city sits at the center of the world's most important trade network. Mist fills the valleys below at dawn. Workers move through a market that has been running since before any living person can remember. Donkeys carry bundles of ivory. Merchants argue prices in 3 languages. A smith beats copper into shape in a corner workshop, and the sound carries across the street. This city is called Aksum, and today the king's treasury is about to make a decision that separates Aksum from every other power on the African continent for the next 4 centuries. They are going to mint coins. Not tokens, not decorative objects, functioning money. Currency designed to move across borders, settle debts in foreign ports, and announce to every trading partner from Rome to the Indian Ghost that Aksum is not a kingdom you haggle with. Aksum is a civilization you negotiate with. The craftsmen work in a space that smells of hot iron and charcoal. They cut blanks from gold sheets with precision chisels. They engrave dies, 2 pieces of hardened iron with the king's face cut into the surface. They place a blank between the dies, strike once with a hammer, and lift the tool. A coin. The portrait is clear. A crown, a staff, a face that will now travel farther than any army Aksum can send. The mint produces in 3 metals: gold for international trade, the high-value transactions with Roman merchants, Arabian intermediaries, and the agents of Indian trading houses who pull into Adulis port every season with ships full of cotton and spice. Silver for the middle tier, regional exchanges with the kingdoms and city-states of the Red Sea Basin. Bronze for the interior markets, the farmers and craftspeople and daily traders who fill Aksum's own streets. This is not improvised. This is a deliberate monetary architecture calibrated to 3 different scales of economic life. Modern central banks operate on the same logic. Aksum built it in the 3rd century. The first coin bears the name Ndugus. He is the first Aksumite king to put his face on money, and the design he sets in place will define Aksumite coinage for the next 400 years. One side carries his portrait and an inscription in Greek, King Ndubis. The other side carries his clan name in Ge'ez, the Aksumite language, a Semitic tongue with its own script that has been spoken in these highlands for centuries. 2 languages, 2 audiences, 1 coin. The Greek speaks to the Mediterranean world,
to the Roman merchants who read that script in their account books, to the Alexandrian traders who use Greek as their commercial language of record, to the port officials at every major harbor between Egypt and Persia. The Ge'ez speaks to the farmers who pay tax in the interior, to the local merchants who know no Greek, to the soldiers and administrators who are the backbone of the Aksumite state itself. The bilingual coin is a piece of deliberate communication design. Aksum knows who it needs to reach, and it reaches them in their own language. A merchant unloads his ship at Adulis. A dock worker reaches out his hand. A gold coin passes between them. The dock worker examines it, feels the weight, reads the face, and pockets it. The transaction closes. The ship moves on. That moment repeats thousands of times a year, across dozens of ports, across 3 continents. It repeats because everyone in the network agrees on the coin's value. That agreement is not ancient instinct. It is built deliberately by an African state that understood money as political technology. By the 19th century, European historians had built an entire scholarly apparatus around the claim that pre-colonial African societies did not have monetary economies. They called it barter. They called it primitive exchange. They wrote textbooks. Universities taught the framework. Museums labeled their African collections in language that implied these objects came from peoples without complex economic thought. The Aksumite coins sat in those same institutions, in some cases in the same rooms. The historians were not ignorant of the evidence. They made a choice. They started from a conclusion that Africa required European civilization to develop and arranged their evidence around it. Any fact that contradicted the conclusion was filed away, listed in specialist catalogs, quietly set aside. A researcher today can pick up an Aksumite coin and read the king's name in Greek on one side and Ge'ez on the other. She can note the weight, the alloy composition, the quality of the portrait. She can compare it to Roman and Persian coins of the same period and confirm that they are equivalent in craft, in monetary function, and in international reach. The coin has been telling this story for 1,700 years.
50 kilometers south of modern Massawa on the Eritrean coast, there is an archaeological site that was once the most important commercial port in the western Indian Ocean. It was called Adulis. At its height, Adulis is not simply where Aksumite goods go to be shipped. It is the hinge point of the ancient world's most lucrative trade network, the junction where goods from 3 continents change hands. To get from Rome to India, your cargo moves through Aksumite waters. To get from India to Rome, same route. The Red Sea is a corridor, and Aksum holds both the key and the toll booth. Aksum did not petition for this position. Geography assigned it. But Aksum understood the position completely, built infrastructure around it, and enforced it with enough military and commercial power to keep every major empire in the region at the table rather than at war. Dawn on the coast. Fishing boats leave the harbor in the dark before the larger trading vessels begin to move. By mid-morning, the docks are loud. Dock workers carry ivory tusks bundled in rope. Heavy sacks of gold dust move under guard. Obsidian blocks, the volcanic glass used for blades, tools, and decorative objects across 3 continents, stack onto wooden pallets. Rolls of dyed cloth, barrels of oil, crates of metalwork move in both directions across the gangplanks. Coming into Adulis, Indian cotton, arriving via Arabian intermediaries. Chinese silk, moving west through a chain of traders who have touched it before any Aksumite hand does. Spices, iron tools, the raw materials that Aksumite craftsmen will work into finished goods and push back out into the same network.
and enslaved people move through Adulis too. The slave trade is part of Aksum's commercial operation, documented in the same sources that record the ivory and the gold. This fact belongs in the record. An honest account of Aksumite power includes the full scope of what that power was built on, including its human cost. The same complexity applies to Rome, to Persia, to every major commercial civilization of this period. Aksum is not exempted from moral accounting by the fact that its history was buried. It is restored to the full record, which means the full record. Around 50 CE, 2 centuries before the first Aksumite coins, a Greek-speaking Egyptian merchant sat down and wrote a trading manual. He called it the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. The Periplus is not history, it is not poetry, it is a buyer's guide to the Indian Ocean, a practical commercial document written by a man who needed accurate information to make money and whose life depended on the quality of that information. His entry on Adulis is detailed and specific. He describes a well-organized port under the direct political authority of a powerful African king. He notes the ivory, the quality of it, and availability. He notes the demand for Roman wine and olive oil. He describes armed customs officials who inspect and tax incoming cargo. Customs officials, tax collection, organized port authority under central political control. This is not a pastoral scene. This is not a primitive exchange of trinkets between strangers. This is a state managing international commercial infrastructure with the same administrative logic that Rome uses in its own ports. The merchant writes as a professional, describing a serious place. He does not express surprise. He does not describe anything unusual. He is taking notes on a well-established operation that other merchants already know about and route their ships toward. The Periplus was well known to European classical scholars throughout the 18th and 19th century. Around 330 CE, the king of Aksum makes a decision that will mark his empire's identity for the next 1,500 years. He removes the crescent moon and the sun disk from his coins. He replaces them with a cross. This is King Ezana, and the change he makes to the face of Aksumite currency is not a minor aesthetic update. It is a political declaration, a theological statement, and a diplomatic broadcast delivered simultaneously to every port, market, and treasury that handles Aksumite money across 3 continents. Ezana does not convert quietly. He does not keep his faith as a private matter for the palace and the court. He puts it on the money, which means he announces it to the Roman merchant examining the coin at Alexandria, to the Arabian trader counting change at Adulis, to the tax official running his thumb across the face of every coin that enters the royal treasury. Every piece of Aksumite currency becomes a statement. Aksum is a Christian kingdom. The timing is precise. The Roman Emperor Constantine had declared Christianity the favored religion of the Roman Empire only years before. The Eastern Mediterranean is reorganizing around Christian networks, churches that double as commercial hubs, bishops who function as political and diplomatic intermediaries, monasteries that operate as banks and warehouses for long-distance trade. To operate in this world as a fellow Christian state is not merely a spiritual alignment, it is a commercial credential. An Aksumite merchant arriving in an Alexandrian port with a gold coin carrying a cross is not a stranger from a distant pagan kingdom. He arrives as a representative of a peer Christian state. The coin is an introduction, a letter of reference, and a statement of shared identity all at once. Ezana understood this.
The cross on the coin is geopolitical calculation in metal. The coin is not the only record Ezana leaves. He commissions stone inscriptions, stela, that record his military campaigns, the expansion of Aksumite political control, his personal conversion, and his gratitude to the Christian God for his victories. The most important of these inscriptions is carved in 3 scripts simultaneously: Ge'ez, Greek, and Sabaean, the language of the ancient kingdoms of southern Arabia. This is Aksum's Rosetta Stone. The trilingual stela confirms in carved stone what the bilingual coins suggest in metal. The Aksumite state communicates across multiple linguistic and cultural worlds as a matter of standard operating practice. The inscription is not translated from one language into the others as an afterthought. All 3 versions are carved with equal care because all 3 audiences matter. Ezana's stela describes military campaigns against neighboring peoples in detail that reads like a formal military dispatch. He lists the peoples defeated, the tribute collected, the territory brought under Aksumite authority. The language is active and direct, a king who did things, reporting what he did. The stela still stands in Aksum. It has stood there for roughly 1,600 years. The inscriptions are worn but legible. Scholars have read them, translated them, and argued over the fine points of their grammar and their historical claims. This is not oral tradition reconstructed centuries later. This is primary source material, in stone, in Ethiopia, carved by the people who made the history it describes. The stele field at Aksum contains the largest pre-modern standing stone structures in sub-Saharan Africa. The obelisks rise up to 30 meters. They weigh hundreds of tons. Aksumite engineers quarried granite, transported it across difficult highland terrain, shaped it with precision tools, and raised it vertically without any technology that colonial-era historians were prepared to attribute to African engineering. When those historians encountered the stela, some of them proposed that the monuments must have been built by outside civilizations, Phoenicians, Arabs, Indians, anyone but the people who actually lived there. The claim was not based on evidence. It was based on the prior conclusion that Africans could not have built such things. The evidence points clearly in one direction. Aksumite quarrying and construction methods are documented in the archaeological record. The engineering is consistent with other Aksumite construction. The cultural and religious symbolism on the monuments is distinctly Aksumite. They built them. Their methods were sophisticated. The result speaks for itself. One of those obelisks was removed by Italian forces under Mussolini in 1937 and erected in Rome, where it stood for decades as a monument to fascist imperial nostalgia. Ethiopia requested its return beginning in the 1950s. The negotiations took 50 years. Italy returned the obelisk in 2008. It stands in Aksum today, where it always belonged.
The year is 525 CE. King Caleb of Aksum stands at the bow of a military fleet and watches the Arabian coast grow larger in the early morning light. He is not exploring. He is not searching for trade. He is going to war. What he is about to do has never been done before and will never be done again. An African empire is crossing the Red Sea to invade and occupy territory on the Arabian Peninsula. The campaign is documented in multiple independent sources: Byzantine Greek chronicles, Syriac Christian texts, inscriptions from the Arabian side of the Strait, and Aksumite records. The documented immediate cause is a massacre.
A Himyarite king named Yusuf has conducted a killing of the Christian population in the city of Nagran, a significant Christian trading community in southern Arabia that has long operated within Aksumite commercial and religious networks. The number of dead recorded in contemporary sources ranges from the hundreds to several thousand. The massacre is not disputed in the historical record. What is disputed is the calculation behind it. Caleb uses the massacre as the public justification for his campaign, but the deeper cause is decades of commercial competition. The Himyarite kingdom of southern Arabia has controlled the eastern coast of the Red Sea Strait for generations. Aksum controls the western coast. Whoever holds both sides holds the corridor, the ability to tax, obstruct, or redirect the most valuable trade route in the ancient world. For 2 centuries, the two powers have managed an uneasy commercial coexistence. The Himyarites have grown increasingly ambitious. They have built relationships with the Sassanid Persian Empire, Aksum's main commercial rival, Rome's primary military enemy, and a power with strong interest in redirecting Indian Ocean trade away from routes that benefit Rome and its allies. A Himyarite-Persian axis across the Red Sea would not just damage Aksumite commercial revenues, it would fundamentally reorder the geopolitics of the Indian Ocean. Byzantine Rome, which has been Aksum's primary diplomatic partner since Izana's conversion, understands this clearly. Emperor Justin I communicates with Caleb directly before the campaign, encouraging Aksumite action as a Byzantine strategic interest. The massacre at Nagran is real. The grief and outrage Caleb expresses in his communications are documented, and the campaign serves Byzantine strategic interests so precisely that the religious justification and the commercial calculation are impossible to fully separate. Caleb does not choose between them. He crosses the sea with both. His fleet carries an army. The Himyarite king's forces are defeated in open battle. Yusuf dies. The sources differ on whether he dies fighting or drowns fleeing across the sea. Caleb installs a Christian client ruler in Yemen. For a period, Aksum controls both coasts of the Red Sea Strait. It is the territorial high watermark of Aksumite imperial power. Byzantine sources record Caleb's campaign with clear admiration. He receives formal diplomatic correspondence from Constantinople. He is described in these sources as a great king, a fellow Christian ruler, and a defender of the faith. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church counts him among its saints. But the campaign costs Aksum more than it recovers. The military operation is expensive at a scale that strains the royal treasury. The client state in Yemen does not hold. Sassanid Persian forces move into Arabia within decades, displacing Aksumite influence from the eastern shore of the strait. By the late 6th century, the Persian Empire controls the Arabian Peninsula's southern coast, and the geopolitical architecture that Caleb had spent his campaign constructing has collapsed. Then, Caleb does something that almost no victorious king in the ancient world does. He abdicates. Byzantine sources record he sends his crown to Jerusalem, physically ships the royal crown to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and retires to a monastery, where he lives out the remainder of his life as a monk. Whether this is genuine religious conviction, the fatigue of a king who has spent his reign at the edge of what his empire can sustain, or political calculation about the costs of clinging to power in a deteriorating strategic position, the historical record does not say with certainty. What it records is the act itself, the campaign,
the abdication, the crown on a ship to Jerusalem, a king walking away from everything he built. That record sits in Byzantine archives, in Ethiopian church tradition, and in the inscriptions Caleb himself left behind. It does not require reconstruction. It requires only the willingness to read what is there.
In 622 CE, on the other side of the Red Sea, a merchant named Muhammad leads his followers out of Mecca toward Medina. It is a journey of roughly 450 kilometers. By the time he dies 10 years later, his followers control the entire Arabian Peninsula. By a century after his death, the Islamic world stretches from Spain to Central Asia. Aksum does not fall to Islamic armies. The historical record is clear on this point. Early Islamic tradition, in fact, holds Aksum in significant regard. The story goes that when Muhammad's early followers were persecuted in Mecca, he sent some of them to Aksum for protection, and the Aksumite king sheltered them. Whether the story is historically precise in all its details, it reflects a real political relationship. Aksum and the early Islamic community had reason to coexist peacefully. What Islam does to Aksum is not conquest, it is redirection. The trade network that Aksum spent 4 centuries building was a Christian Mediterranean network. Roman, then Byzantine, commercial relationships routed through ports where Christian merchants operated and Christian institutions provided commercial infrastructure. Islamic expansion reorganizes the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea basin. New trade networks form, new port cities rise, new intermediaries control the flow of goods between India and Europe. These networks route around Adulis. They do not need it. They have their own ports, their own currencies, their own systems of trust and verification. The harbor at Adulis gets quieter season by season. Ships that used to stop there continue past. The merchants who built their businesses around Aksumite commercial connections find their networks shrinking. The gold coins still circulate internally. They still hold value inside Aksum itself. But the international demand that gave those coins their reach, the reason a Roman merchant or an Indian trader would accept an Aksumite gold piece as settlement, that demand fades. Aksum contracts. The empire does not shatter, it pulls inward. The royal capital relocates south, deeper into the highlands, away from the coastal infrastructure that defined the empire's commercial identity. Agricultural production increases to compensate for lost trade revenue. The church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo, whose institutional roots run directly back to Ezana's conversion in the 4th century, becomes the central organizing structure of social and political life. The language survives. Ge'ez remains the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church and is still used in religious services today, more than 1,500 years after Aksumite kings put it on their coins. The construction tradition survives. The connection to the Solomonic dynasty that Ethiopian royal history claims, running forward through medieval Ethiopia, through the empire of the 19th and 20th centuries, to the church that stands in Addis Ababa today, runs backward through Aksumite political culture. Aksum does not disappear. It transforms into what becomes medieval and then modern Ethiopia. The name changes, the trade routes change, the foundation holds. In the 19th century, European historians sit in their libraries and write the story of Africa. They are not working without evidence. They have the Periplus. They have Gibbon,
who described Aksum as one of the 4 great empires of the world in its time. They have catalogs of Aksumite coins that have been circulating in European collections since the 17th century. They have translations of Ezana's trilingual stelae. They have the physical record, the stelae, the ruins, the coins, sitting in institutions across Britain, France, Germany, and Italy. Edward Gibbon's acknowledgement of Aksumite greatness sits in one of the most widely read works of historical scholarship ever produced in the English language. It is not hidden. It is in the text that shaped how educated Europeans understood the late antique world. It did not make it into the curriculum. The curriculum needed a different Africa. The justification for colonial extraction, the civilizing mission, the claim that European powers were bringing development to peoples who had none, requires that those peoples actually have none. An Africa with monetary economies, bilingual diplomatic documents, trilingual state inscriptions, military campaigns on 2 continents, and gold coins that competed with Roman currency for 400 years is not an Africa that requires civilizing. So the evidence was managed, not destroyed. Coins are hard to destroy. Not hidden. The catalogs remained in the libraries. But the interpretive framework that would connect the evidence to a coherent story of African sophistication was never built, never funded, never taught in the institutions that shaped public understanding. The coins sat in their drawers. The periplus sat on its shelf. The stelae stood in Aksum, worn by rain and readable by anyone who came to look. Today, Aksumite numismatics is one of the most active research areas in the study of late antique economies. Isotope analysis traces Aksumite gold back to specific mines in the Ethiopian highlands and identifies which supply chains the treasury was drawing on at different points in the empire's history. Metallurgical study of the bronze coins reveals the precise alloy compositions and what they tell us about Aksumite access to tin and copper from across the trade network. Computer imaging reconstructs the portraits of rulers from coins worn nearly smooth by centuries of handling. Of the roughly 20 Aksumite kings identified through their coins, only 2, Ezana and Caleb, are confirmed by independent inscriptions. For all the others, the coin is the only record that survives. An entire sequence of rulers, an entire span of political history exists because coins are too small to bother throwing away. An estimated 98% of the city of Aksum remains unexcavated. The site underneath the modern city holds what may be the administrative archives of one of the ancient world's most sophisticated states: tax records, diplomatic correspondence, trade accounts, royal decrees. Or it holds nothing. The ground has not been asked yet. The researcher lifts an Aksumite gold coin with cotton gloves. She holds it under a lamp. The portrait is worn almost to abstraction, but the crown is still there. The cross is still there. The ring of text around the edge, Ge'ez on one side, Greek on the other, is still legible if you know what you're looking at. The coin is 1,700 years old. It has been telling the truth for every year of that time. The king's face, stamped in that gold, built a port city that connected 3 continents. His treasury ran a monetary system that competed with Rome. His court communicated in multiple languages to multiple worlds simultaneously. His empire controlled the only sea route between Europe and India, went to war to protect it, and held it for 4 centuries. None of it was lost. None of it was buried by time
or by accident. It was set aside deliberately by people who needed a different story and who had the institutional power to make the story they needed the only one most of the world heard. The coins survived them. The coins are still here. And now, so is the record.